Mishpachah. Welcome to another GoyaGroup.com video. We make these videos to provide source information to those seeking truth, so that all believers and followers of Yahweh Elohim may come to one accord based in truth. Yahweh Elohim is a designation of the mighty one or deity of Yashra'al, who is ancient Israel, of which the Bible is derived. As always, we have restored the name of the Father Yahweh from the inserted title Lord, and the designation of power to all or Elohim from the inserted title God. Yahweh is the tetragrammaton or four abreed or Hebrew letters of Yud, He, Uau, He that appears almost 7,000 times in the Torah Tanakh, or the Hebrew version of the Old Testament. This is a three-part video series that will be on the validity of the New Testament. Is the New Testament presented by the Catholic Church true? Is it useful? Is it even scripture? The short answer is no. The New Testament, or NT as we will designate it in this series, is a mythicized version of the real historical events that occurred during the 1st century CE in Palestine. This is part 2 of the series, Is the New Testament True? And this is section C of Paul and the Herodians, the truth of Paul's travels in Palestine. This is subsection 2, the truth about Stephen's martyrdom. We will be using the same dating metaphor of the 4 historical strata from section A of this video. We will also use the same citation system of section A. If you have no idea what these are, please watch the first 5 minutes of section A of this video. We will also provide primary sources, which are first-hand accounts of events, as well as secondary sources, which are scholarly sources commenting on the topic of primary sources. In this section of part 2 of this video series, we're going to map the movements of Paul of Tarsus to separate the historical facts from the NT fiction. In part 2C, subsection 1, we examine Paul's first trip to Palestine and the historicity or historical accuracy of the NT. What we found was that it was way departed from reality, and with the dating of the NT being almost totally false and only using historical figures and some events to give it some sense of credibility. We showed how Paul probably came into Palestine at the same time as Herod Agrippa I in 41 CE, when Herod Agrippa I was given the kingdom of Roman Judea by his close friend, the Emperor of Rome. Silas, who was with Paul continually within the NT narrative and is recorded as a fellow Roman citizen, grew up with Agrippa I. The mentioning of Paul and Manaheim growing up with an unnamed Herod in Acts 13:1 was probably Agrippa I. It could have been Herod Antipas, who actually did grow up in Palestine and was responsible for the death of Yochanan and Mercer, or John the Baptist, as well as his younger cousin Yahusha, who was the HaMashiach, or the Messiah. The problem with that, however, is that Paul knew Herod Agrippa II personally, the son of Herod Agrippa I, and Agrippa II did not come into Palestine until 48 CE. Therefore, the only way the narrative makes any sense at all is that Paul grew up with Agrippa I in Rome and thus came to know his son before he, Silas, and Agrippa I all came to Palestine to claim Agrippa I's throne in 41 CE. We proved that the dating of 30 to 33 CE is impossible for the time period following the execution of HaMashiach, and that actually occurred in about 38 to 39 CE, after the execution of Yochanan and Mercer by Herod Antipas in about 37 to 38 CE, which occurred around the time of the death of Tiberius Caesar in late 37 CE. So we know the dates of all of this. It's well recorded. This makes the Shavuot, or Feast of Weeks, commonly referred to as Pentecost, that followed the execution of HaMashiach, having to occur sometime after about 39 CE. We displayed the obvious Roman Catholic Church cover-up of the election of Yaakov Tzaddik, or James the Just, as the leader of the Nazarenes by hiding it within the filling of the 12th position as Shuliach, or apostle, left vacant by Yehuda of Kerioth, or Judas Iscariot, after the first Pentecost following the execution of HaMashiach, which had to be sometime after 39 CE. We finished subsection 1 showing that the chronology of the NT in general is totally broken, but Acts in particular is extremely egregious in its account of history, proven with this record of Theudius, who was probably Yehuda or Jude, being beheaded before Yehuda Gamala or Judas Galilean, which is totally impossible, given that Yehuda Gamala was killed in 6 CE at the time of the taxing by Augustus Caesar, and Theudas or Thaddeus was beheaded nearly 40 years later after the Great Famine started in the days of Thaddeus in 44 CE. We're going to continue to wash away the sand layer left by the Roman Catholic Church to bury the truth and uncover Paul's factual actions in granite layer sources. These sources will provide the factual information as to what happened after Paul joined up with the Nazarenes, following the mysticized election of the 12th Shuliach and the stoning of an individual Acts introduces as Stephen. We pick up in Acts as it gives us our first account of Paul working with Barnabas, and it dates this to after the Great Famine started in 44 CE, but before the beheading of Thaddeus in 45 CE, where we left off at in the previous section. Sefer Ma'asim, or the Book of Acts, 1130. Then the Talmudim, disciples, every man according to his ability, determined to send relief to the brothers which dwelt in Yahudah, or Judea, which also they did, and sent it to the elders by the hands of Barnabas, which is Barnabas, and Saul, who is just Paul. As stated, the traditional chronology given by the church cannot be correct, because if Yahusha died in 30 or 33 CE, then the first Pentecost or Shabu'ut following it would be the one just before Stephen is killed. We know this is not the case because, as we have shown, Acts dates itself with some tangible historical events and people, and all of these display a date in the early 40s and not in the early 30s of the Common Era. The book of Acts further dates this period to during a time when the Grecians began to grumble or murmur against the Hebrews or Hebrews because of some widows of the Greeks were not being served as they thought proper in Caesarea. Caesarea Philippi was a city located north of Galilee and a part of the region of Syria during the 1st century CE. Sefer Ma'asim, Book of Acts 6:1 gives us information about this. And in those days, when the number of the Talmudim was increasing, there arose a murmuring of the Grecians against the Hebrews, because their widows were neglected in their daily serving. Acts uses this time period to create the setting for the 12 to move up Stephen and some trusted others so they could focus on their own worship. Acts just cannot seem to get it together historically. There was indeed a conflict that happened in Syria between the Yehudi and the largely Greco-Roman Shamaruni or Samaritans, but this was much farther south and was depicted much later in the timeline than that fake history of Acts. We see this in our primary source, Josephus, Antiquities 26:1, how there happened a quarrel between the Yehudis and the Samaritans, which are the Greco-Shomaruni population, like I just said, and how Claudius put an end to their differences. Now there arose a quarrel between the Samaritans, or the Syrian Greeks, and the Yehudi. On the occasion following, it was the custom of the Galileans, when they came to the Kadush city at the festivals, to take their journeys through the country of the Shomaruni. And at this time there lay, in the road they took, a village that was called Gineah, which was situated in the limits of Samaria and the Great Plain, where certain persons thereto belonging fought with the Galileans, and killed a great many of them. There's your conflict right there. The Greco-Syrian population was killing the Yehudi that passed through their lands just trying to go to their festivals. This was the real conflict. Not that the Grecians wanted to be served. That is more church propaganda that promotes that men of the faith don't have time to work, which is pure nonsense. The Syrian Greek population bought off Vindicius Cumanus, who was the Roman governor from 48 to 52 CE. We read in 119, but when the principal, meaning the leading men of the Galileans, were informed of what had been done, they came to Cumanus, or Cumanus, however you want to say his name, and desired him to avenge the murder of those that were killed. But he was induced by the Samaritans, or the Syrian Greeks, with money to do nothing in the matter. Here we have the wealthy Greco-Syrian community paying off the Romans to turn a blind eye to the mistreatment and murder of the Yehudi in Galilee, which was the same region that Hamashiach and all the 12 Shilikim, or apostles, were from. This in of itself is not rock solid proof that this is the exact same situation that Acts was attempting to record. And it is definitely true that Josephus could have, oddly enough, not known about such an event. But Acts does give itself a time period for the events of Stephen after Paul from Tarsus goes to Damascus sometime in the early 40 CE based on its own chronology. So it fits. This included a messianic eruption in Lydia that Acts claims involved Kepha, where he met a woman named Dorcas, and then the event of Kepha meeting a Roman centurion named Cornelius, which Acts would have you believe were all after the events of the stoning of Stephen and Paul's attack on the assemblies of the Nazarenes sometime in the early 30s CE, after the official death of Hamashiach in 30 or 33 CE. But as shown, the book dates itself to the 40 CE with the historical people and events. So when we go to Sefer Ma'asim, or Book of Acts 9, we see this messianic eruption and these dating that Acts gives itself, its own internal dating that actually conflicts with this chronology here. Verse 31 reads, then the assemblies throughout all Yehuda and Galil and Shumarun had rest and were edified, and were walking in reverence of the Master, and in the comfort of Ruach HaKadosh. They were increased. And it came to pass, as Kepha passed throughout all quarters, he came down also to the Kudashim, which dwelled in Lydda. Now there was at Joppa a certain Talmud named Tabitha, which by interpretation is called Dorcas. This woman was full of good works and kind deeds which she did. These are events Acts list about the region in Palestine called Lydda, with a city Joppa in it, and a follower of the movement named Dorcas. This will throw the chronology of Acts totally out of sync with reality, as is evident from our granite layer sources of Josephus. In the same chapter we were just reading, except in line 129, but when he was informed that a certain of the Yehudi were making innovations, that's that trigger word Josephus liked to use, the innovators, he ordered those to be impaled who Cumanus had taken captives. From whence he came to a certain village called Lydda, which was not less than a city in largeness, and there heard the Shomeruni cause a second time before his tribunal. And there learned from a certain Shomeruni that one of the chief of the Yehudi, whose name was Dortus, and some other innovators with him, 4 in number, persuaded the multitude to revolt from the Romans. Please keep in mind that Josephus, in his writings, lumps the whole group of these different camps that are against the establishment Herodians as zealots. Some are the Yashraali or Israelite Essenes or Nazarene innovators led by Yaakov Siddiq or James the Just that Josephus sees as magicians and liars, while others are with the Sicarii, who he understands to be robbers and assassins that were the Idumeans or Edomites nationally. Whether it was really a man named Dorcas or a woman named Dorcas in Lydda is irrelevant. The point is that there was definitely a conflict between the Syrian Greeks and the Messianic movement involving these innovators. Therefore, Acts gets the theology right again, but the history dead wrong as usual. Emperor Claudius solves this whole issue by removing Cumanus and sending in Felix, who is the one Acts has overseeing Paul's house arrest during his third trip that we will discuss in part 2C3 on Paul's last trip to Palestine. This information is in the exact same book, just chapter 7. Felix is made procurator of Yehuda, as also concerning Agrippa Jr., which is Agrippa II, and his sisters. So Claudius sent Felix, that's the emperor sending Felix, the brother of Paulus, to take care of the affairs of Yehuda. And when he had already completed the 12th year of his reign, he bestowed upon Agrippa, which is Agrippa II, the tetrarchy of Philip and Batanea, and added thereto Trachonites with Albia, or Abila, which last had been the tetrarchy of the Lysanias. But he took from him Chalcis, when he had been governor there for 4 years. And when Agrippa had received these countries as the gift of Caesar, he gave his sister Drusilla in marriage to Azizus, king of Emesa, upon his consent to be circumcised. Marcus Antonius Felix was the Roman procurator of Judea province, or the Judean province, sit in 52 CE by Claudius until he was replaced in 60 CE by Porcius Festus. In 53 CE, Agrippa II took over the former territories once belonging to his uncles during the 12th year of the reign of Claudius, who ruled 13 years from 41 to 54 CE. Agrippa II took Chalcis about 4 years prior to this, so that places him in control of most of Palestine after the famine in about 48 CE. This puts the events of the conflicts between the Greeks and the Abrim, or the Hebrews, that Acts depicts in the early 30 CE or even in the early 40 CE as historically occurring in the early 50 CE, and thus totally fictional. As we continue with this narrative about Stephen, it's going to be even more evident how false this truly is. Sefer Ma'asim, or the book of Acts, chapter 6, verse 2. Then the 12 called the multitude of the Talmudim to them and said, "It is not reasonable that we should leave the word of Elohim and serve tables." So they decided that they can't go do the work because they're about their faith and they can't be bothered with doing anything else but the faith. So, therefore, brothers, you seek out among you 7 men honest of report, full of Ruach HaKadosh and wisdom, whom we may appoint over this business. But we will give ourselves continually to prayer and in the service of the word. And the saying pleased the whole multitude, and they chose Stephen, a man full of faith and of Ruach HaKadosh, and Philip, and Prochorus, and Nicanor, and Timon, and Parmenas, and Nicholas, a proselyte of Antioch. These 7 were never mentioned before anywhere, and there's no telling where this whole concept even came from. But these 7 were selected to do the work of serving tables and the like to the Greeks, so the 12 could stay focused on their ministry. This is the same system of the church today and has nothing to do with Torah or HaMashiach, but loosely replicates the priestly system for the Lewi or Levites from old. Later in the same chapter, the alleged high priesthood, who is still in power after killing Yahusha, that has to date it to the 30 CE, now starts to cause problems for these missionaries and make charges against this Stephen in particular. Same chapter, verse 12. And they stirred up the people and the elders and the scribes and came upon him and caught him and brought him to the council, meaning the Sanhedrin, and set up false witnesses, which said, This man does not cease to speak blasphemous words against this Kudush place and the Torah. For we have heard him say that this Yahusha of Nazareth, meaning the Nazarene, shall destroy this place, meaning the second temple, and shall change the customs which Musha delivered to us. And all that sat in the council, looking steadfastly on him, saw his face as it had been the face of a Malak. The narrative here is that some men from the high priesthood, Sadducees, and Pharisees caused a commotion or a tumult that the people started bearing false witnesses against this character Stephen. Please keep that in mind for later. The theology is spot on here. These people did bear false witness, but only because the things prophesied did occur. So what they heard him say about Yahusha and his speaking against the temple was not wrong, because the temple did fall. Also, Yahusha did speak against the form of Torah they were using during that period that allowed for sacrifice, eating flesh, drinking strong drink, divorce for any reason, and polygamy. This was the next version of Musha coming to put things in the right order as Musha had foretold. This is an Ebionite doctrine and is all over the literature associated with them. Not only does Stephen come out of nowhere saying all of these things, but he looks as if he's like a Malak too. So this is something that also happened with Musha, right? After the Exodus. His face started glowing. It's a little bit too much. The Herodian establishment priests get so mad that they decide in the Sanhedrin that this man got to die. Chapter 7, verse 1, Ma'asim, or Book of Acts. Then said the high priest, "Are these things so?" And he said, "Men, brothers, and fathers, hearken. The Elohim of esteem appeared to our father Abraham when he was in Mesopotamia before he dwelt in Haran, or Haran." Notice how he refers to their common ancestry in Abraham and not in Yashra'al or Yaakov Israel. No Jacob Israel here. Just Abraham. He goes on to provide a riveting account, which is not remotely scripturally or historically accurate. And Elohim spoke on this wise, that his, meaning Abraham's seed, should sojourn in a strange land, and that they should bring them into bondage and entreat them evil for 400 years. This is a common theme recounted in television and religious institutions everywhere, and is a total miscarriage of history and scripture, because to anyone who studies, they know that Yashra'al, or ancient Israel, was only in Kemet, or Kemet, what we call Egypt, for just over 200 years, and not 400. The historian Josephus records this fact as well. This can be easily found in Antiquities, Book 2, Chapter 15, Verse 2, line 315. Chapter 15 is about how the Abrim, or Hebrews, under the conduct or leadership of Musha, left Misraim, or Egypt. They, meaning Yashra'al, left Misraim, meaning Egypt, in the month of Xanthicus, meaning Abib, on the 15th day of the month, 430 years after our forefather Abraham came into Canaan, but 215 years only after Yaakov removed into Misraim. It was the 80th year of the age of Musha, and that of Aharun 3 more. They also carried out the bones of Yusuf with them, as he had charged his sons to do. As usual, the historical account of Josephus is on point, and he has Yashra'al only being in bondage for 250 years in Kemet, not 400. This record of events is also witnessed in the historical accounts of Ha-Safar, Yashar, or the Book of Jasher, which means the Book of the Upright. This book can only be dated to the Middle Ages and is not canonical, but the Lying Roman Catholic Church doesn't determine what is canon for anyone, and the information within the text is supported by the Targums, or translation texts, which are from the 1st century, and they all predate the NT. Sefer Yashar, or the book of Jasher, 81:3. It reads, "And the sojourning of the children of Yashra'al, who dwelt in the land of Mizraim in hard labor, was 210 years." Whether it is 215 or 210, the issue is the same. The chronology given in Acts is about 200 years off from the textual account and the historical truth. This was probably done to hide the 400-year prophecy to the seed of Abraham, but that is a whole other video entirely. If anyone ever just adds up the ages given from Kuhath or Kohath, the son of Louis or Levi, who traveled with them into Mizraim, to his grandson Musha, who led everyone out, it doesn't add up to 430 years or even 400 years, especially when you're considering that the suffering of Yashra'al didn't occur until after 40 years of Yusuf or Joseph ruling. Stephen also gets another critical piece of information wrong: the grave purchased by Abraham. Back to Sefer Ma'asim, or the book of Acts, chapter 7. Now we're in verse 16. "And were carried over into Shechem and laid in the sepulchre that Abraham bought for a sum of money of the sons of Emor, the father of Shechem." Now, to anyone who actually studies these texts, you know that this is not accurate. This Stephen is quoting Joshua that led the people after Musha died. And we have it right here. Sefer Joshua, or the book of Joshua, 24:32. "And the bones of Yusuf, which the children of Yashra'al brought up out of Mizraim, they buried in Shechem, in a parcel of ground which Yaakov bought of the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem, for 100 pieces of silver. And it became the inheritance of the children of Yusuf." Yeah, Abraham did not buy that sepulchre. Yaakov bought it. Acts is just continuing its focus on the seed of Abraham because that is the Idumeans or Edomites' claim to fame. This is not some typo in the Masoretic either, because the Septuagint and the Targums repeat it. Yaakov bought that burial place, and the NT is just pushing its very Gentile-friendly doctrine while ignoring the nation of Yashra'al for the purpose of replacing them with the general seed of Abraham. We see that this Stephen doesn't even know scriptures, but somehow he was so well versed, his face is glowing, and he cut the Pharisees and Sadducees with the word? All right. Sefer Ma'asim, book of Acts, chapter 7. We're going down to verse 54 here. "When they heard these things," meaning his whole rant here that was totally in error, "they were cut to the heart, and they gnashed on him with their teeth. But being full of Ruach HaKadosh, he looked up steadily into heaven and saw the esteem of Elohim and Yahusha standing on the right hand of Elohim, and said, Behold, I see the heavens open and the Son of Man standing on the right hand of Elohim. Then they cried out with a loud voice and stopped their ears and ran upon him with one accord and cast him out of the city and stoned him. And the witnesses laid down their clothes at a young man's feet whose name was Saul. And they stoned Stephen, calling upon Elohim and saying, Master Yahusha, receive my Ruach, or spirit. And he kneeled down and cried with a loud voice, Master, do not hold this sin against them. And when he had said this, he fell asleep, meaning he died. This heartbreaking depiction in Acts of the murder of Stephen by the upper or chief priest with the aid of Paul is a staple lesson in the Christian faith. This is the moment that Paul overcomes and proves that anyone, no matter how bad the sinner, can repent and be a servant for the Most High Yah. There's only one problem here. The real historical event that Acts mythicizes happened long after Paul's conversion in the 40s and was actually Paul killing Yahusha's little brother Yaakov Sadiq, or James the Just, who was the leader of the movement in the 60s CE. Therefore, There are only two options here. Either Paul converted and then he turned evil, or Paul never really converted and was always evil. Either way, we will prove the history of all of this and that these issues are nothing new. Please notice how they all rush Stephen with one accord, how Acts claims that this Stephen has a vision of the Son of Man coming in the clouds on the right hand of the Father, and how he was on his knees praying for forgiveness for those stoning him. There wasn't a historical Stephen that was a member of that camp or sect at that level recorded anywhere in the granite or concrete layers of history. As we stated, this is just an overwrite for the murder of Yaakov Siddiq or James the Just by Agrippa II through his puppet Herodian Kuhan Hagadol Canaan, or the high priest Ananias, with the assistance of their relative Saul or Paul of Tarsus. Let us take a look at what is written about the murder of Yaakov from the historical strata, starting from the sand layer and working our way down through history by digging until we get to something solid. The NT is a sand layer primary source, and it has no mention of the murder of Yaakov Siddiq, even though the supposedly historical book of Acts ends in the exact year of his death in 62 CE. How do we know it ends in 62 CE? Well, we know this because Paul is on house arrest in Herod's palace for the last 2 years of Antonius Felix's governorship, which ended in 60 CE. Then he was replaced by Festus. As stated, the book of Acts has some serious internal dating issues. Safar Ma'asim 23:35. I will hear you, he said. This is Felix talking, when your accusers have also come. And he commanded him to be kept in Herod's palace or mansion. Then when you go to chapter 24, verse 27, it reads, but after 2 years, so we know Felix ended in 60, after 2 years, Porcius Festus came into Felix's room, and Felix, willing to show the Yehudi a pleasure, left Paul bound. Paul then goes on to Rome because he requested to go before the wicked Nero, who slaughtered many of those that believed in HaMashiach, and he pleaded his case. But Acts assures you that this was not Paul telling on his own nation, this was just him seeking some justice. Safar Ma'asim 28, verse 19. But the Yehudi spoke against it, and I, this is Paul talking, was compelled to appeal to Caesar. He's talking about Nero here. Not that I had any accusation against my nation. Acts records that Paul went to the emperor of Rome for help, just like the other Herodians did. And we know it matters that this is Nero, because Acts does everything it can to do to identify him as anything but Nero, even calling him by his other name, Augustus. 25:21. But when Paul had appealed to be reserved to the hearing of Augustus, I commanded him to be kept till I might send him to Caesar. Then we have 25:25. But when I found that he had committed nothing worthy of death, and that he himself has appealed to Augustus, I have determined to send him. So Paul keep getting help from Augustus. He's looking for help from Augustus. Which Augustus is this talking about, though? One thing's for certain, this is obviously not Gaius Octavius, who was the first emperor of Rome from 23rd September 63 BCE to 19th of August 14 CE, who was actually named Augustus. Nope. This is Nero Claudius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, based on the time period, of course, because he was emperor from 13th October 54 CE to 9th June 68 CE. Then Acts ends with Paul living in Rome, free as a bird. Safar Ma'asim 28, verse 30. And Paul dwelt 2 whole years in his own hired house, and received all that came into him. This ends the historical account of Acts in 62 based on its own chronology. This has nothing to do with me or my interpretation. This is what Acts is telling you is happening. This happened to be the same year as the death of Yaakov Siddiq, but Acts has no information about this. Acts doesn't even account the death of Kafar or any of the others except the fictional Jacob, the brother of Yochanan, or James, the brother of John, who are the sons of Zebedee in the NT narrative. We have shown in the last subsection that this is historically inaccurate, as it was Thaddeus, or Yahuda, who is commonly known as Jude, who was beheaded by Herod of Chalcis during that time period. This means that the Acts of the Apostles doesn't actually record any of the life or deaths of the apostles or shilikim. Since the NT has no mention of the death of such an important individual from his time in the 4th century when it was put together, we're going to have to seek information from the Orthodox Church Fathers to see what they got to say. As we start digging through this sand here, we're going to start with Jerome or Hieronymus that lived from 347 CE to 420 CE. He records the event and cites both Josephus and Clement for credibility. The primary source is his De Viris Illustribus. I don't speak Latin, but it means on illustrious men. This chapter is on Jacob Siddiq or James the Just and reads, Josephus also in the 20th book of his Antiquities, and Clement in the 7th of his outlines mention on the death of Festus, who reigned over Yahudah, Albinus was sent by Nero as his successor. Before he reached his province, Ananias, the high priest, the youthful son of Ananias of the priestly caste, this is Canaan ben Canaan or Ananias, son of Ananias, taking advantage of the state of anarchy, assembled a council or Sanhedrin and publicly tried to force Jacob to deny that Mashiach is the son of Elohim. When he refused, Ananias ordered him to be stoned. Cast down from a pinnacle of the temple, his legs broken, but still half alive, raising his hands to heaven, he said, Master, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Then struck on the head by the club of a fuller, such a club as a fullers are accustomed to wringing out garments with, he died. This same Josephus records a tradition that this Jacob was of so great sanctity and reputation among the people that the downfall of Jerusalem was believed to be on account of his death. The Orthodox Church Father Jerome quotes Josephus and Clement and then informs the reader that not only was Jacob Siddiq murdered just as we have proposed, but that the very downfall of Jerusalem and the temple itself was attributed to his death. So for anyone who does not believe in HaMashiach as a historical figure, you're going to have a hard time explaining the destruction of the second temple without mentioning him or his brother. Jacob was thrown down from the same pinnacle that HaMashiach was offered the world by Hashatan in the gospel narrative, and his legs were broken, so he was kneeling and praying for them when this happened. We're going to continue to dig because such an accusation against Paul cannot be stated without multiple witnesses to establish the matter. We do not take this lightly. We fully understand the implications of this, and it took a very long time with multiple pieces of evidence for us to accept it. But the truth is the truth, regardless of our personal beliefs. We dig a little deeper here. We're at the Orthodox Church Father responsible for the historical record of the Catholic Church. This is Eusebius of Caesarea, who was a historian of Christianity, exegete, and Christian polemist that lived from 265 CE to 339 CE. We have already shown Eusebius' account in part before, but we will now look at these events in comparison to the NT. In his ecclesiastical history as a primary source, chapter 2, verse 22 here. Paul, having been sent out from Yahudah to Rome, made his defense and was acquitted of every charge. Festus was sent by Nero to be Felix's successor. Under him, Paul, having made his defense, was sent bound to Rome. And Luke, who wrote the Acts of the Apostles, brought his history to a close at this point. after stating that Paul spent 2 whole years at Rome as a prisoner at large and preached the word of Elohim without restraint. As stated, this ends the non-historical document we call Acts of the Apostles in 62 CE, with Paul being saved by Emperor Nero after he called on Caesar for help, like all the Herodians usually do. It seems that Eusebius is well aware of how this could look, and he tries to explain this away, or basically make explanation of this friendship of the evil Nero to the famous Paul of Tarsus in a quick line. It is probable indeed that as Nero was more disposed to mildness in the beginning, Paul's defense of his doctrine was more easily received, but that when he had advanced to the commission of lawless deeds of daring, he made the Shilachim, as well as the others, subjects of his attacks. So basically, Eusebius' logic is that Nero was happy with Paul at first, but then turned on him later. All right. Now, when we take another look at Eusebius' account of the murder of Jacob, we will see more crucial information. Church history records the martyrdom of Jacob, who was called the brother of the master. But after Paul, in consequence of his appeal to Caesar, had been sent to Rome by Festus, the Yehudi, being frustrated in their hope of entrapping him by the snares which they had laid for him, turned against Jacob, the brother of the master, to whom the episcopal seat in Jerusalem had been entrusted by the Shilachim. The following daring measures were undertaken by them against him. Before we continue, we want to point out that what you will notice when you study the NT and the Catholic Church's account of events in general is that the church wants everyone to believe that HaMashiach's own people betrayed him and were ultimately responsible for his death. This is why the NT doesn't distinguish between Edomite and Israelite, so that they can foster that confusion. There is no I do me or Yashra Ali. They're all the same. This is also why the NT makes it seem like these Herodians were decent for the most part and even accepted the teaching of HaMashiach, all the while they're killing everyone in the region, right? The Roman Church needed to remove the assembly of Yashra and replace them with their Catholic Church, which is literally called replacement theology, and Catholic literally means universal. In order to do this, the Romans had to demonize the people of Yahuda, which meant making them seem as if they had betrayed HaMashiach, and even making the 12 seem dim-witted or not as enlightened as the Gentile-friendly Paul of Tarsus. This was also known to someone even as capitulating as Josephus, because as we have shown, he remarked how people were trying to flatter the Romans and speaking lies against the Yehudi. Eusebius continues in his historical account of events, leading him being Jacob, into their midst, the midst being the Sanhedrin. They demanded of him that he should renounce faith in Mashiach in the presence of all the people. But contrary to the opinion of all, with a clear voice and with greater boldness than they had anticipated, he spoke out before the whole multitude and confessed that our Savior and Master, Yahusha, is the Son of Elohim. But they were unable to bear longer the testimony of the man who, on account of the excellence of aesthetic virtue and of piety which he exhibited in his life, was esteemed by all as the most just, or Siddiq, righteous of men, and consequently they slew him. Opportunity for this deed of violence was furnished by the prevailing anarchy, which was caused by the fact that Festus had just died at this time in Yahuda, and that the province was thus without a governor and head. Porcius Festus dies under mysterious circumstances in 62 CE, and it is our belief that Agrippa II and Canaan ben Canaan, or Ananias, son of Ananias, killed him so that Agrippa II could install Canaan as the high priest instead of the Romans in the commotion. Eusebius gives some facts, but in typical church fashion, he obfuscates some crucial elements of the truth. He later quotes Hegesippus again to give himself credibility, and this account has even more details. Hegesippus, who lived immediately after the Shilachim, gives the most accurate account in the 5th book of his memoirs. He writes as follows: because of his exceeding great justice, he is called the Just, and Oblias, which signifies in Greek bulwark of the people and justice, in accordance with what the prophets declare concerning him. So Jacob or James was a strong wall of justice for the city of Jerusalem. And when he fell, the city fell too. Now, some of the 7 sects which existed among the people and which have been mentioned by me in the memoirs asked him, what is the gate or the way of Yahusha? And he, meaning Jacob, replied, he was the Savior. On account of these words, some believe that Yahusha is HaMashiach, but the sects mentioned above did not believe either in a resurrection or in one's coming to give to every man according to his works. But as many as believe did so on account of Jacob. Jacob Siddiq, or James the Just, is actually accredited with causing many people to believe that his brother was the Messiah. The sects, like the Pharisees and Sadducees, to which Josephus and Paul of Tarsus belonged to, did not believe, but the multitude or the mob did. His example and his words were a light to the world. Yet the NT portrays as if he wasn't even a Shuliach or apostle, though. Some people actually believe that as well, and you can't even blame them because that's what's presented in the text. When we continue to read, therefore, when many, even of the rulers, believed, there was a commotion among the Yehudi and the scribes, or the Sadducees, and Pharisees, who said that there was a danger that the whole people would be looking for Yahusha as HaMashiach, which is what we're supposed to be looking for, right? Coming therefore in a body or Sanhedrin to Jacob, they said, we entreat you, restrain the people, for they are gone astray in regard to Yahusha, as if he were HaMashiach. We entreat you to persuade all that have come to the feast of the Pesach concerning Yahusha, for we have all confidence in you, as do all the people, that you are a just or Siddiq man and do not respect persons, meaning he shows no favoritism. At the end of the year 62 CE in Jerusalem during the festival of Pesach, which was the same festival Yahusha died 23 years prior in 39 CE, the Herodian establishment, Sadducees and Pharisees, pleaded with Jacob to calm everybody down because the people were all Messianists and believed Yahusha was the Messiah. The Herodians knew he was a good person and had the will of the people, so they tried to get him to betray the faith, and you will see shortly how this relates directly to Stephen, if you cannot already see it now. Therefore, persuade the multitude not to be led astray concerning Yahusha, for the whole people and all of us have confidence in you. Stand therefore upon the pinnacle of the temple, that from that high position you may be clearly seen, and that your words may be readily heard by all the people. For all the tribes with the Gentiles also have come together on account of the Pesach. Yeah, we see the Gentiles are keeping the Pesach too, right? Because that was the Torah, and they did not have a different one just because they were not born Yashra'ali. That's totally false doctrine. So it continues. The aforesaid scribes, meaning the Sadducees, and Pharisees, therefore placed Jacob upon the pinnacle of the temple, so everybody could see him, and cried out to him and said, you just one, in whom we ought to all have confidence, for as much as the people are led astray after Yahusha, the impelled one, declare to us what is the gate or the way of Yahusha. And he answered with a loud voice, "Why do you ask me concerning Yahusha, the Son of Man? He himself sits in heaven at the right hand of the great power and is about to come in the clouds of heaven." Please note that Yaakov Sadiq, his brother, knew that he was the son of a man and not some demi-deity. The Sadducees and Pharisees tried to reduce the Messianic movement by using a figurehead to spread their message, but this backfired. Yaakov doubled down on the faith and evoked the imagery of Ha-Nabi Daniel, or the prophet Daniel, about the Messiah. And this is evident right in Sefer Daniel, or the book of Daniel, chapter 7, verse 13. "I," meaning Daniel, "saw in the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man came with the clouds of heaven, and came to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him near before him. And there was given him dominion and esteem and a kingdom, that all people, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom that which shall not be destroyed." This obviously messianic verse in Daniel is exactly what Yaakov was applying to Yahusha, and exactly who Yahusha is. Continuing with church history here on verse 14, "And when many were fully convinced and gloried in the testimony of Yaakov, and said, Hosanna to the Son of David, these same scribes," meaning the Sadducees, "and Pharisees said again to one another, We have done badly in supplying such a testimony to Yahusha, but let us go up and throw him down, in order that they might be afraid to believe him. And they," meaning the Herodian high priest, "cried out, saying, Oh, the just Sadiq man is also in error. And they fulfill scripture written in Yeshayahu, or Isaiah, Let us take away the just man, because he is troublesome to us. Therefore they shall eat the fruit of their doings." This is supposedly quoting Yeshayahu, or Isaiah 3:10. But that verse is different than what we have left to us in the Masoretic text, given to us by the Jews 1,000 years ago, in use as everyone's OT today. When you read that chapter, that verse makes no sense in the context of the passage. That exact verse is in the earlier Greek Septuagint, though, which reinforces the point of the cover-up. Continuing. "So they went up and threw down the just man, and said to each other, Let us stone Yaakov Sadiq," or James the Just, "and they began to stone him. For he was not killed by the fall, but turned and knelt down, and said, I entreat you, Yahweh Elohim, our Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." This is the real and true heartbreaking murder that occurred. The Pharisees and Sadducees started a tumult or a commotion, and rushed him with one accord and pushed him from the pinnacle or the steps of the temple. And the reason he was kneeling, because his legs were broken from the fall. And then they decided to stone him to death as he prayed for their forgiveness. We have the account from Hegesippus showing the exact set of events that happened to Stephen, which means crown in Greek, happened to the leader of the Nazarites, which is used for the term of the crown for the high priest in the Brit or Hebrew. Yaakov even mimicked his brother's words, asking for forgiveness for those who were at that time killing him. Continue with the church narrative or the church history here. "And while they were thus stoning him, one of the priests of the sons of Rechab, the son of the Rechabites, who are mentioned by Yirmiyahu HaNabi, or Jeremiah the prophet, cried out, saying, Stop, what are you doing? The just one prays for you. And one of them, who was a fuller," meaning a laundryman, "took the club with which he beat out clothes, and struck the just man on the head. And thus he suffered martyrdom. And they buried him on the spot, by the temple, and his monument still remains by the temple. He became a true witness, both to Yehudi and Greeks, that Yahusha is HaMashiach, or the Messiah, and immediately Vespasian besieged them. Eusebius concludes, these things are related at length by Hegesippus, who is in agreement with Clement. Jacob was so admirable a man and so celebrated among all for his justice, that the more sensible even of the Yehudi were of the opinion that this was the cause of the siege of Jerusalem, which happened to them immediately after his martyrdom, for no other reason than their daring to act against him. We hope you all are paying attention here. Eusebius left out the part of Jacob being stoned by the high priest and his last words while they did it, whereas Jerome left out Jacob's vision from Daniel. Both left out these crucial details for obvious reasons, because it would have exposed the Stephen lie. But Eusebius, he does supply these other accounts that had to be going around during this time, both from Clement and Hegesippus, that were in agreement that the siege of the temple and its ultimate destruction was an account of this event. Jerome's record agrees, as do several other historical accounts. This is how the church changes history. They start with the truth and slowly insert lies while slowly removing truths like some evil game of Jenga. It is historically understood that the reason the temple went down was because of the murder of the little brother of Hamashiach. Again, at this point, anyone who denies the existence of Yahusha as a historical figure falls flat, because if he wasn't real, then why was the temple destroyed over the death of his brother who was confessing him as a legendary Messiah? That makes no sense. This definitely convicts Canaan ben Canaan, or Ananias son of Ananias, and the Pharisees and Sadducees as a whole. But we know it doesn't say anything about Paul or Agrippa II, so don't worry, we're about to get into that too. When taking a look at a lower layer of the historical strata in the form of Clementine homilies, we get even more information as we continue to dig through this sand, through the rocks, trying to get to something solid here. Flavius Clemens was a member of the royal family of Caesar and lived from 35 CE to 99 CE. He was an apostolic father from the concrete layer of history that was recruited by Yusuf Bar Nabah, who is also known as Mattathiyahu or Matthew, in Rome. And he was later a student of Kepha, who is also known as Peter, and recorded his travels as well as the other Nazarenes. In the writing attributed to him, the Nazarene Acts of the Apostles, we got a chapter called Tumult Raised by Paul. And it reads, and when matters were at that point that they should come to be immersed, and one of our enemies entering the Hakel, meaning the temple, with a few men began to cry out and say, what mean you, O men of Yashra'al? Why are you so easily hurried on? Why are you led headlong by the most miserable men, who are deceived by Shama'un, a magician? While he was thus speaking and adding more to the same effect, and while Jacob the Mabakar was refuting him, he, meaning Paul, began to excite the people and raise a tumult, so that the people might not be able to hear what was said. Paul is the one that started the tumult or the uproar recorded in Acts against Stephen with the false witness. This is what really happened here. Therefore, he, meaning Paul, began to drive all into confusion with shouting, and to undo what had been arranged with much labor, and at the same time reproach the Kohanim, and to enrage them with revilings and abuse, and like a madman to excite everyone to murder, saying, what do you do? Why do you hesitate? O sluggish and inert, why do we not lay hands on them and pull these fellows to pieces? When he said this, he first, seizing a strong brand from the altar, set the example of smiting. Then others also, seeing him, were carried away with like readiness. we see that the historical truth is that this was actually about Yaakov Sadiq, and Paul set the example of beating people by being the first to strike people with instruments, which led to a bloody scene. Continuing, then ensued a tumult on either side. Of the beating and the beaten, much blood is shed. There is a confused flight, in the midst of which that enemy, meaning Paul, attacked Yaakov and threw him headlong from the top of the steps. And supposing him to be dead, he cared not to inflict further violence upon him. Paul is the specific individual who pushed him down from the pinnacle. He was then stoned and struck on the head with the club that killed him, because as we see, Paul got everyone to start beating people with weapons. Continuing the narrative, we read, in the flight to Jericho, then before daylight we went down to Jericho, to the number of 5,000 men. Then after 3 days, one of the brethren came to us from Gama'al, whom we mentioned before, bringing to us secret tidings that that enemy, meaning Paul, had received a commission from Caiaphas, the Kohen Hagadol, that he should arrest all who believed in Yahusha, and should go to Damascus with his letters, and that there also, employing the help of the unbelievers, he should make havoc among the faithful, and that he was hastening to Damascus chiefly on this account, because he believed that Kepha had fled there. Paul is specifically identified as the enemy clearly in the Nazarene Acts, which is a far more historical document and was probably the original book of Acts early on. The chapter is titled with his name, and the events match Acts perfectly, with the language of him making havoc among the Nazarene or Ebionite community being exactly the same. We see Paul was actually chasing Kepha as well. The church has taken this account from Clement and warped it to fit their new revised version of history in Acts. This event did not happen in the 40 CE because we just showed that it resulted in the death of Yaakov Sadiq. But this is their method of slowly inserting lies and slowly removing truth. This is why there's no more writings of Clement, and we can only get them from the church or their sources. They destroyed his writings purposely because the information was obviously too damaging for their new universal religion. And they chose Paul over Yaakov because he was their best chance to grow that religion. The text then says, Paul, the enemy, received orders from Caiaphas to go to Damascus to chase after Kepha to arrest him. Now you got to ask yourself, why would the church go through all of these overwrites and redactions if this was just a part of his conversion process in the early 40 CE? It's simple. It wasn't a part of his conversion process. The death of Yaakov Sadiq, or James the Just, was in 62 CE, right after Festus mysteriously died, and Agrippa II made Canaan ben Canaan, or Ananias, son of Ananias, the high priest. When we dig even deeper to a granite layer source like Josephus, these facts become even more clear. We can see this in Antiquities, Book 20, Chapter 9, which is on concerning Albinus, under whose procuratorship Yaakov was slain, as also what edifices were built by Agrippa. In line 197 we read, and now Caesar, meaning Nero, upon hearing the death of Festus, sent Albinus into Yehuda as procurator. But the king, this is Agrippa II, deprived Yusuf of the high priesthood and bestowed the succession to that dignity on the son of Ananias, who was also himself called Ananias. This is Canaan ben Canaan, or Canaan, son of Canaan. Now, the report goes that this eldest Ananias proved a most fortunate man, for he had 5 sons who had all performed the office of a high priest to Elohim. These are the Herodian puppet high priests we talked about, and who had himself enjoyed that dignity a long time formerly, which had never happened to any of our other high priests because it wasn't legitimate. Anyway, but this younger Ananias, who was, as we have told you already, took the high priesthood was a bold man in his temper and very insolent, and he was of the sect of the Sadducees, who were a very rigid in judging offenders. Above all the rest, the Yehudi, as we have already observed. As stated before, this was the sacerdotal family. They were Idumean and they owned the priesthood. Continuing. When therefore Ananias was of this disposition, he thought he had now a proper opportunity to exercise his authority. Festus was now dead, and Albinus was but upon the road. So he assembled the Sanhedrin of judges and brought before them the brother of Yahusha, who was called Mashiach, whose name was Yaakov, and some others, or some of his companions. And when he had formed an accusation against them as breakers of the Torah, he delivered them to be stoned. But as for those who seemed the most equitable of the citizens, and such as were the most uneasy at the breach of laws, they disliked what was done. They also sent to the king, meaning Agrippa, desiring him to send Ananias that he should act so no more, for that what he had already done was not to be justified. Nay, some of them went also to meet Albinus, as he was upon his journey from Alexandria, and informed him that it was not lawful for Ananias to assemble a Sanhedrin without his consent. This was an illegal Sanhedrin that they did here. Whereupon Albinus complied with what they had said and wrote in anger to Ananias and threatened that he would bring him to punishment for what he had done, on which King Agrippa, meaning Agrippa II, took the high priesthood from him, when he had ruled but 3 months, and made Yahshua the son of Demeneus high priest. Just as stated before, King Herod Agrippa II, who rose to power in the region about 48 CE after the great famine and his uncle Herod of Chalcis died, he took advantage of the death of the Roman governor Festus to install Canaan, the son of the same Canaan that was so instrumental in the death of Hamashiach, as the high priest in Jerusalem. As soon as Canaan got power, he put together this illegal Sanhedrin and convicted Yaakov Sadiq of blasphemy, because he was big mad that the zealot Sichari killed his brother Jehonathan, and a wall that was built in front of Herod's palace blocked their view of the set-apart place. That's all in Josephus is another point, but the point is, blasphemy was the exact same charge leveled against Stephen, and this was the exact same way that Stephen died. Stephen, or the crown, is the lie they inserted, and Yaakov Sadiq was the truth they removed. This was the wicked priest killing the righteous teacher with the help of the enemy from the Qumran, or the Dead Sea Scrolls documents. Today, such an evil and heinous act on the righteous little brother of Hamashiach is all but forgotten, and Paul is only remembered as ordering the stoning of some rando named Stephen that came out of nowhere in a few lines, and an act spends the next 20 chapters building Paul's reputation back up. There was a historical Stephen, though, and you know he is recorded in antiquities, but just as with everything else, it is not as advertised in the NT. We find our historical Stephen in Book 20 of Josephus, chapter 5. This is the same time period in the early 40s that the mythical Stephen was from. This is concerning Theudas and the sons of Yehuda Gamala, as also what calamity fell upon the Yehudi on the day of Pesach. Line 105 reads, Now, while the Yehudi affairs were under the administration of Cumanus, there happened a great tumult at the city of Jerusalem, and many of the Yehudi perished therein. But I shall first explain the occasion whence it was derived. This is the same Vindicius Cumanus that was the Roman procurator of Idaean province from 48 to 52 CE. This is the dude who took the money from the Greco-Syrians to turn a blind eye when they were murdering the Galileans just trying to keep their festivals. It is at this time that Agrippa II started to rule the region as the Herodian king, replacing his uncle Herod of Chalcis as well as his other few uncles. This Cumanus was the predecessor to Antonius Felix, under whom Paul served the first 2 years of house arrest in Herod's palace. These events follow the Great Famine between 44 and 48 CE and the beheading of Thaddeus or Thomas Judas by Herod of Chalcis. Line 106 reads, when that feast, which is called the Pesach or Passover, was at hand, at which time our custom is to use unleavened bread, and a great multitude was gathered together from all parts to that feast. Cumanus was afraid lest some attempt of innovation should then be made by them. So he ordered that one regiment of the army should take their arms and stand in the temple cloisters to repress any attempts of innovation, if perchance any such should begin. There was way too many Yehudi gathered in one spot. He got nervous and called the centurions because he was afraid there would be a revolt or innovation from Roman rule. Continuing, and this was no more than what former procurators of Judea had done at such festivals. But on the 4th day of the feast, a certain soldier let down his breeches and exposed his private parts to the multitude, which put those that saw into a furious rage, and made them cry out that this impious act was not done to approach them, but Elohim himself. Nay, some of them reproached Cumanus and pretended that the soldier was set on by him. Now, before this their first morning was over, another mischief befell them also. For some of those that raised a foregoing tumult, when they were traveling along a public road about 100 furlongs from the city, robbed Stephen, a servant of Caesar, as he was journeying, and plundered him of all that he had with him. Which things, when Cumanus heard of, he sent soldiers immediately and ordered them to plunder the neighboring villages and to bring the most eminent persons among them in bonds to him. Now, as this devastation was making, one of the soldiers seized the Torah of Musa that lay in one of those villages and brought them out before the eyes of all present and tore them to pieces. And this was done with reproachful language and much scurrility. Here is your historical Stephen. He was a servant of Caesar. Paul was a friend of Nero, as we have shown, and here we have a servant of Caesar named Stephen being trampled by the mob and robbed after a centurion exposed himself to the crowd at Pesach. The robbers and assassins in the city were the zealot Sicarii, who were the Idumeans or scriptural Edomites. After the real Stephen was robbed and beaten, the Romans had innocent people robbed and jailed and then ripped up the Torah of Yashraal in front of the multitude over this Stephen. This is the historical truth, not the fairy tale the NT passes off. This Stephen or Stefanus or Stefanus was actually a friend of Paul too, oddly enough, and it is even recorded in the NT. Let Paul tell you himself. 1 Corinthians 1:16. And I immersed, meaning he baptized, also the household of Stephanos, or Stephen. Besides, I know not whether I baptized any other. This house of Stephen is the only house Paul even remembers immersing in Corinth. Chapter 16, verse 15 reads, I beseech you, brothers, you know the house of Stephanos, or Stephen, that it is the first fruits of Achaia, and that they have addicted themselves to the ministry of the saints, or the Kudashim. This house of Stephen was the first fruits of another acquaintance of theirs, according to Paul, and his house was following after the matters of the Kudashim, or the set apart ones. I am glad of the coming of Stephen and Fortunatus and Archias, for that which was lacking on your part they have supplied. Verse 24. My love be with you all, Mashiach Yahusha. The first epistle to Corinthians was written from Philippi by Stephen and Fortunatus and Archias and Timotheus. Paul informs the readers that Stephen was the author of his first letter to Corinthians. We see that Paul is giving the historical truth here, and that this Stephen, who was so vital in Paul's ministry, had his name exalted to that of Yaakov Tzaddik by the Catholic Church. Now that we have shown you the murder of Stephen was actually the revised version of the murder of Yaakov Tzaddik, which we know happened after the death of Festus in 62, we will have to face the fact that Paul of Tarsus was involved in the murder of Yaakov in 62 CE, which was long after he was already supposed to be converted in the early 40 CE. Regardless of your theology, there's just no way around this historical conundrum that has existed for 2,000 years. All this chaos leading to this critical murder occurred in Acts would have had you believe Paul is in protective custody at his own house in Rome from 60 to 62 CE. This was Rome providing Paul with an alibi. Since the Roman Catholic Church has recorded this all, it seems pretty clear to us that they knew exactly what happened, but are banking on the masses being too ignorant to read through the layers for themselves. This is a key reason why the Roman Catholic Church was opposed to the translations of their texts into other languages, because it reduced the church's control on information. Even before the time of Yaakov Tzaddik was murdered, Paul was the liar and the enemy to the Nazarene or Ebionites, and he did not keep the law and was causing people to stumble to the point of destruction, and it is reflected in the Essene or Ebionite literature within the DSS or Dead Sea Scrolls. We see this in a commentary on Habakkuk. It reads, this passage refers to the traitors with the man of the lie, because they have not obeyed the words of the teacher of righteousness from the mouth of Elohim. It also refers to the traitors to the new covenant, because they did not believe in Elohim's covenant and desecrated his Kadosh name. And finally, it refers to the traitors in the last days. These Idumi or Idumeans, including Paul, did not listen to Yaakov Tzaddik or the teacher of righteousness. Therefore, they polluted the faith, and this was seen as an abomination, with the imagery all too apparent in the Qumran Corpus in respect to those who attacked their leader, this teacher of righteousness, killed by the wicked priest and this liar. The two instruments of violence who rule Yerushalayim, they are cursed for making the city a stronghold of wickedness and for committing an abomination or pollution. These two instruments of violence are the wicked priest and the liar, who turned the city from being a strong wall or bulwark of justice to a stronghold of evil through their murderous acts. Yasra'al had banned sacrifice by order of Yaakov Tzaddik and banned foreigners from the temple and any offering anyone would make for them. These were the zealous Nazarim or Nazarenes that were of the sect that HaMashiach belonged to. This was their strange or divine worship with a new kind of linen-wearing ministries out of a new covenant called Sadduki or Zadokites that lived in the wilderness, which are the sons of righteousness over the old establishment that was overrun with foreigners. The old priesthood was totally destroyed, so this new priesthood or ministers were totally removed from that old way. This new covenant was one without killing animals, was anti-foreigner, and was thus anti-Herodian, as they were viewed as foreign rulers at that period. This included doing away with the 3 nets of Belial mentioned in Part 2a, as well that was most certainly the accusations against the wealthy, niece-marrying, polygamous Herodians that were polluting the temple. The Damascus document is a perfect example for this. It reads, during all these years, Belial, which is, for lack of a better translation, my Lord God, which is why we're very careful about how we address the Father. Belial should be unleashed against Yashra'al, as is spoke by the hand of Yashayahu, or Isaiah, son of Amoz, saying, terror and the pit and the snare are upon you, O inhabitant of the land. Interpreted, these are the three nets of Belial, with which Louis, son of Yaakov, said that he catches Yashra'al by setting them up as three kinds of righteousness. The first is fornication, the second is riches, and the third is profanation of the temple. The group associated with Yaakov Sadiq in Yerushalayim had come to be known as zealots or innovators, just as Shamma'un, the listed cousin, but probably the actual brother of Yahusha, is depicted in the Besorah or Gospels, as we discussed in section B. Again, this doctrinal truth bleeds through the narrative of Acts when examining those who were with Yaakov as he ruled in Yerushalayim during the 50s, when Paul made his second trip to Yerushalayim, which we will outline later. Sefer Ma'asim, or the book of Acts 21:20. And when they heard it, they esteemed the master and said to him, do you see, brother, how many thousands of Yehudi there are which believe, and they are all zealous of the Torah. So everybody around there, even according to the book of Acts, were zealots if they were into the Torah. The people who were following Yaakov Sadiq on the Temple Mount were called zealots. During the early 40s CE, Shamma'un Kafah, or Simon Peter, actually banned the king, King Herod Agrippa I, and his daughter Bernice from the temple for them being foreigners. We define this in Flavius Josephus' Antiquities, Book 19, Chapter 7. Concerning Silas, on what account it was that King Agrippa was angry at him, how Agrippa began to encompass Yerushalayim with the wall, and what benefits he bestowed upon the inhabitants of Beirut. And it reads, however, there was a certain man of the Yehudi nation at Yerushalayim, who appeared to be very accurate in knowledge of the Torah. His name was Shamma'un, or Simon. This is Kepha. This man, meaning Kepha, got together an assembly while King Agrippa I was absent at Caesarea, and had the insolence to accuse him as not living Kadush, or set apart, and that he might justly be excluded out of the temple, since it only belonged to native Yehudi. Historically, Agrippa I lived from 11 BCE to 44 CE, and was the Roman appointed king of Yahuda from 41 to 44 CE. When this incident between Agrippa I and Shamma'un occurred, it was prior to the death of Agrippa I in 44 CE, recorded in Book 19 and Book 20 of his Antiquities, that listed the institution of Cuspius Fadus, who was an ancient Roman equus and procurator of Iudean province in 44 to 46 CE. Herod was made king of Yahuda, or Roman Judea, in 41 CE, thus making this incident between him and Kepha as being in the early 40 CE, after Agrippa I arrived in the region from his exile in Rome with his friend Silas and also their close associate Paul. The event occurred near the end of the Book 19 of Antiquities, is a 3.5-year period that ended at the time of Fadus in 44 CE. Since we know that this event happened at the time when Herod Agrippa was in Caesarea, we just need to know when he was in Caesarea to determine the year of this incident, and Josephus provides all of that information in great detail. Same Book 19, Chapter 8 of his Antiquities. What other acts were done by Agrippa until his death, and after what manner he died. Now, when Agrippa had reigned 3 years all over Yehuda, he came to the city Caesarea, which was formerly called Strato's Tower, and there he exhibited shows of honor of Caesar. Now, this places this incident around the year 43 CE, or in the early 40s of the Common Era. So, this is when Kepha, or who they call Peter, he goes to Agrippa I in the early 40s and tells him he got the role because he is a foreigner. At this time in history, the Herodians were being forced out of the region by the zealots who had the will of the people behind them that viewed them as pollution to their land and nation. Shamma'un Kepha was indeed a man well versed in Torah and was world renowned for it. He had a famous debate with Shamma'un HaMagi, or Simon the Magi, that Acts just totally glosses right over. Shamma'un was such a pivotal character in history, the NT has taken him and made him the leader, but has silenced him with only 2 letters. The last of which definitely didn't even come from him, which we will get to in due time. We must go back to this Drusilla for more information about this magician, though. As we showed earlier, when Claudius gave Agrippa I his throne, he thanked him by having her marry a king named Azazus. But Agrippa canceled that and had her marry the procurator of Yehuda in a total power play when she was just 19 years old. We find this information in Antiquities Book 20, Chapter 7, which is about Felix is made procurator of Yehuda, as also concerning Agrippa Jr. or Agrippa II and his sisters. Line 141 reads, "But for the marriage of Drusilla with Azazus, it was not in no long time afterwards dissolved upon the following occasion. While Felix was procurator of Yehuda," this is the same Felix who put Paul in house arrest, "he saw this Drusilla and fell in love with her, for she did indeed excel all other women in beauty. And he sent her a person whose name was Shamma'un, one of his friends, a Yehudi he was, by birth a Cypriot," meaning he was from Cyprus, "and one who pretended to be a magician, and endeavored to persuade her to forsake her present husband and marry him, and promised if she would not refuse him, he would make her a happy woman. Accordingly, she acted ill, and because she was desirous to avoid her sister Bernice's envy, for she was very ill treated by her on account of her beauty, she was prevailed upon to transgress the laws of her forefathers, her grafted in forefathers, because she wasn't really ours for all, and to marry Felix. And when he had a son by her, he named him Agrippa." This was Agrippa III. "But after what manner that young man with his wife perished at the conflagration of the Mount Vesuvius in the days of Titus Caesar shall be related hereafter." Shamma'un HaMagi, or Simon the Magi, was close friends of Felix, who was also very friendly with Paul. Felix sent Drusilla to this magician in order to get her to marry him. This was obviously done with the consent of Agrippa I, and this magician and Agrippa I were fierce enemies of Kepha during the early 40s, but not Paul, at least not yet anyway. Felix married Drusilla after she forsook the law and divorced her husband. She was convinced by a Yehudi man named Shamma'un the magician, and she later died in a volcanic eruption that killed many other wealthy Romans and Herodians in 79 CE. This magician is none other than Simon the Magi. He is accounted in Acts in the very same chapter where Paul participates in the fake murder of Stephen we just covered. Sefer Ma'asim, chapter 8, verse 9. "But there was a certain man called Shamma'un, which before time in the same city used sorcery, and bewitched the people of Samaria, giving out that he himself was some great one." Acts' disregard for history is par for the course. The books display some minor conflict between this mage and Kepha, or Peter, and the magician even seems to want to be a follower of the Nazarenes. The little interaction or exchange they have depicted in the pages of Acts, where he offers money for miracles and is rebuked by Kepha, does not reflect the historical reality of their relationship in any way other than Kepha rebuking him. This Shamma'un HaMagi was originally an apprentice or follower of Yochanan of Mercer that traveled into Misraim, or Egypt, after Yochanan was arrested and executed by Herod Antipas, which divided the movement into many different little sects, of which the Nazarenes were one. In the Nazarene Acts of the Apostles, Book 2, we read, For the people were now divided into many parties, ever since the days of Yochanan the Dunker, or John the Baptist. Shamma'un HaMagi was one of those from Yochanan who thought they themselves were HaMashiach. This is on Yehudi sects. Yeah, some even of the Talmudim of Yochanan, who seem to be great ones, have separated themselves from the people and proclaimed their own master as the Mashiach. As we have shown, Acts even disclosed this information on the magician, although simply calling him someone who thought he was a great one. There is so much more to this individual and his impact on the region, but we must venture outside of the non-historical Acts to retrieve it. We find this information in Clementine literature, Recollections of Clement, Book 2, Chapter 7 on Simon Magus and his history. This Simon's father was Antonius, and his mother was Rachel or Rachel. By nation, he is a Samaritan, from a village of the Getones. By profession, a magician, yet exceedingly well trained in Greek literature. Desirous of glory and boasting above all the human race, so that he wishes himself to be believed to be an exalted power which is above Elohim the Creator. That's right, he thought he was above the Creator himself. And to be thought to be HaMashiach, and to be called the Standing One. And he uses this name as implying that he can never be dissolved, asserting that his flesh is so compacted that by the power of his divinity that it can endure to eternity. Hence, therefore, he is called the Standing One, as though he cannot fall by any corruption. This Simon the Magi was a Gnostic, just like Marcion of Sinope was, and is considered by some, myself included, to be the father of Gnosticism. Marcion of Sinope, if you recall, was the first to use Paul's letters in his version of the New Testament in the 1st century CE. The Standing One theme is even translated into Islam today as their Iman. This magician also studied out of Egypt, which became his base of operations, thus making him called the Egyptian. And Kafar viewed him in the same manner as the Egyptian magicians that were in conflict with Musha. In Book 2 of his Recognitions, Clement records, in a similar transaction, I see that I am even now engaged. This is Kafar, or Peter speaking. For as then, when Musha exhorted the king to believe Elohim, the magicians opposed him by a pretend exhibition of similar signs, and so kept back the unbelievers from salvation. So also now, when I have come forth to teach all nations to believe in the true Elohim, Shamma'un HaMagi resists me, acting in opposition to me as they also did in opposition to Musha. Kafar and this magician got into a 3-day debate over the scriptures during the 40 CE, recorded by the Acts of the Nazarenes, which are recorded by Kafar's student Clement of Rome, and what we understand to be the closest thing we have to the real book of Acts left to us from the concrete layer of history. In the Act of Nazarenes, Book 1, we read, Kafar sent to Caesarea. While therefore we abode in Jericho, and gave ourselves to prayer and fasting, Yaakov the Mabakar sent for me, and sent me here to Caesarea, saying that Zakkai had written to him from Caesarea, that one Shamma'un, a Samaritan magician, was subverting many of our people, asserting that he was the Standing One. That is, in other words, the Mashiach, and the great power of all Alion, which is superior to the creator of the world, at the same time that he showed many miracles and made some doubt and others fall away to him. He informed me of all things that had been ascertained respecting this man from those who had formerly been either his associates or his Talmudim, and that afterwards he had been converted by Zakkai. This is the same Zakkai that Yahusha, the little short guy that Yahusha met on the way, in the road amongst the crowd. Many, therefore, there are, O Kafar, said Yaakov, for whose safety's sake it behooves you to go and refute the magician, and to teach the word of truth. Therefore, make no delay, nor let it grieve you that you should set out alone, knowing that Yahweh by Yahusha will go with you and will help you, and that soon by his favor you will have many associates and sympathizers. Now be sure that you send me in writing every year an account of your sayings and doings, and especially at the end of every 7 years. With these expressions, he dismissed me, and in 6 days I arrived in Caesarea. This Shamma'un was Gnostic and did not merely think he was a great one or some rando great one. He thought he was the great one, the Mashiach. His magic caused many people of the region to fall into error, as he told everyone that the creator of the earth was not the true Elohim. And you see those elements in the church today. Don't believe Christians are Gnostic, or there's a hint of Gnosticism in Christianity? Have you ever heard Christians say that the deity of the OT is not the deity of the NT? Or that the deity of the OT is for the Jews and the deity of the NT is for Christians and everyone else? What about Paul saying that Hasatan is the deity of this world? 2 Corinthians chapter 4 reveals this. But if our Besorah is hidden, it is hidden to them that are lost, in whom the power deity Elohim of this world has blinded the minds of them which do not believe, unless the light of the glorious Besorah of Mashiach, who is the image of Elohim, should shine to them. Paul says that Shaitan is the power or deity of this world and has hidden his Besorah or good news to those that are lost or blinding them. The issue with this is when you read the Torah, you see that it is Yahweh who does the blinding. Sefer Yeshayahu, or the book of Isaiah 29:10. For Yahweh has poured upon you the ruach of deep sleep, and has closed your eyes, or blinded the prophets and your rulers. He has covered or blinded the seers. Paul's verse seems a little Gnostic to us, but we will let the viewer come to their own conclusions on that. Kafar dealt with the father of the Gnostics, Shamma'un HaMagi, at the order of the Mabakar, or the overseer in Yerushalayim, the brother of Yahusha, Yaakov Tzedek. This account in Acts is just a mythicized version of these real events. The Roman Church had to obfuscate the situation due to the conflicts between Paul and the 12. This information is pretty much what the historian Josephus recorded, also because he, as we have shown, did not believe the Nazarene movement or the Messiah and thought of them as liars and impostors. He records the events as he understood them, and Shamma'un's treachery of pretending to be HaMashiach is unwittingly reflected in his works, that he understood this Egyptian to be the same one that he was claiming to be, the Nazarene Messiah. In chapter 8 of book 20 of his Antiquities, after what manner upon the death of Claudius Nero succeeded the government, as also what barbarous things he did concerning the robbers, murderers, and impostors, those are all zealots to them, that arose when Felix and Festus were procurators of Yahuda. Line 160 reads, Now, as for the affairs of the Yehudi, they grew worse and worse continually, for the country was again filled with robbers, meaning the Sicarii, and impostors, meaning the Nazarenes, who deluded the multitude. Line 167. And now these impostors and deceivers persuaded the multitude to follow them into the wilderness, and pretended that they would exhibit manifest wonders and signs, meaning perform miracles, that they should perform by the providence of Elohim. And many that were prevailed upon them suffered the punishments of their folly. For Felix brought them back and then punished them. This was a part of the zealot movement on the Temple Mount. They called people out to the wilderness of Yahudah and were indeed performing signs. But as usual, the Herodian Pharisee Josephus sees them as robbers, murderers, impostors, and liars. Then, who he understood to be their Messiah, enters on the scene and has an incident on the Mount of Olives. Line 169. Moreover, there came out of Mizraim about this time to Yerushalayim one that said he was a prophet, and advised the multitude of the common people to go along with him to the Mount of Olives, as it was called, which lay over against the city at the distance of 5 furlongs. This is supposed to be Yahusha, obviously, but we will show that it cannot be him. This was an anti-Messiah that came out of Egypt and that said he was a prophet. And to Josephus, he was just a liar. Line 170 reads, he said further that he would show them from hence how, at his command, the walls of Jerusalem would fall down. And he promised them that he would procure them an entrance into the city through those walls when they were fallen down. This prophecy against the temple is exactly what Yahusha said would happen and was one of the charges in Acts against the non-historical Stephen. Josephus, as a Pharisee, was totally lost to the message of HaMashiach and thought he was telling the people they would have an entrance to the city, but he was offering them an entrance into the kingdom of heaven coming to earth. Now, when Felix was informed of these things, he ordered his soldiers to take their weapons and to come against them with a great number of horsemen and footmen from Jerusalem, and attacked the Egyptian and the people that were with them. He also slew 400 of them and took 200 alive. But the Egyptian himself escaped out of the fight, but did not appear anymore. The Herodian Pharisee Josephus's understanding of the events was that this happened in the time of Felix, and he is supporting Antonius Felix, who murdered 400 of this group of zealots that he thinks are following their false Messiah. This was indeed a false Messiah, and as we have shown, this Egyptian or magician that we understand was Shamma'un HaMagi or Simon the Magi was pretending to be one that all in the region knew was HaMashiach. We know this is true because of the dating for the incident. Antonius Felix was governor from 52 to 60 CE. Therefore, this could not have been Yahusha, the brother of Yaakov Sadiq, regardless of your dating method, because he was definitely dead before the year 40 CE. The actions of this Egyptian were well known, and even Acts makes mention of him specifically, but as if he is a different person than Shamma'un HaMagi, and this Gnostic Egyptian is directly associated with Paul. Sefer Ma'asim 21:38. It reads, "Are you not that Egyptian which before these days made an uproar and led out into the wilderness 4,000 men that were murderers?" This is a verse that so many people use to prove Paul's Yisraeli heritage based on the fact that Musha, Yusuf, Yahusha, and many others of Yisrael were all mistaken for Misrian or Egyptian. But this verse has nothing to do with his appearance. Paul was not accused of being an Egyptian. He was accused of being a specific person who was called the Egyptian and led people into the wilderness. As usual, Acts is off in the history and records 4,000 men instead of 400. This was about the sect or camp that Paul belonged to, not what he looked like. In his alleged trial, he's accused of being a ringleader in the sect of the Nazarenes. We read this in Sefer Ma'asim, the book of Acts 24:5. "For we have found this man a pestilent fellow, and a mover of sedition among all the Yehudi throughout the world, and a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes." Paul was not accused of being a member of the Nazarenes at this point by a high priest named Canaan or Ananias, as we have shown. That is the historical truth of the murder of Yaakov Sadiq, and Acts has yet again provided doctrinal truth, but just lies about the historical facts. This account in Acts is obviously the same one from Josephus, and the author of Acts probably used Josephus and the Clementine literature to make their fake book, just as the Roman Church used all the writings of the Essenes or Nazarenes to form their fake religion of Christianity. This is evidenced by information from our concrete layer in the next one up, the gravel layer. Justin Martyr, who was born 100 CE, which was 1 year after Clement of Rome died, and died 165 CE, cataloged this in his Apologies, and also in his now lost work called against heresies, which is recorded by the Gravulaire Irenaeus, and he uses the information for his work Adversus Heresies, written in 180 CE. So this is a secondary source here because he got it from a primary source. It reads, such was his, meaning Shamma'un or Simon's, procedure in the reign of Claudius Caesar, by whom also he is said to have been honored with a statue on account of his magical power. This man then was glorified by many as if he were a deity, and he taught that it was himself who appeared among the Yehudi as the son, but descended in Shamma'un as the father, while he came to other nations in the character of the Ruach HaKadosh, or the set-apart spirit. Now, this Shamma'un Hamaruni, or Simon the Samaritan, from whom all sorts of heresies derive their origin. This is clearly the Trinity doctrine, and in the late 2nd century, it was considered to be a heresy. We even have in the Clementine literature the same heretical doctrines that the church formulated from this wicked person, Shamma'un Hamagi, or Simon Magus. Chapter 14, Simon Magus professes to be Elohim. He thus answered, do not think that I am a man of your race. I am neither magician, nor lover of Luna, nor son of Antonius. For before my mother, Rachel or Rachel, and he came together, she still a virgin conceived me, while it was in my power to be either small or great, and to appear as a man among men. The exact language of before they came together was taken from the Gnostic teaching of Simon the Magi and used in the NT for their virgin birth doctrine. Can you imagine how the 12 and the other followers of HaMashiach will look at the world now with these beliefs? Only by the time of the church father Origen, who was born in 182 CE and died in 254 CE, were these looked at as doctrinally sound. This is what happened in that gravel layer of history. Pieces were shuffled around to create the religion that the Gentiles would accept. This magician was anti-Mashiach, obviously, but Acts pretends if he actually wanted to join the Nazarenes. Acts just jumbles the history here and keeps some of the doctrinal elements. Agrippa I was angered by Kafar, and Acts records him being pursued by Agrippa I during the early 40s over that whole incident about getting kicked out of Palestine for being a foreigner. So in Sefer Ma'asim, or the book of Acts chapter 12, we see the pursuit of Agrippa I to Kafar over this whole incident about him, going on him for being a foreigner. Verse 11 reads, and when Kafar was come to himself, he said, now I know of a surety that the master has sent this Malach, messenger or angel, and has delivered me out of the hand of Herod, and from all the expectation of the people of the Yahudi. Before we close out Paul's first trip to Palestine in the 40 CE, we need to discuss the issue of the vision of Kafar and his alleged interaction with the Roman centurion Cornelius from chapter 10 of Acts, because it will be relevant for Paul's second trip to Palestine. Kafar supposedly meets this righteous man that is not described as being a Messianist or believer in HaMashiach, but nonetheless, Acts accounts him as being a good Roman centurion based on his prayers and giving to the poor. Chapter 10 of Acts, verse 1. There was a certain man in Caesarea called Cornelius, a centurion of the band called the Italian band, a devout man, and one that feared Elohim with all his house, which gave much alms to the people and prayed to Elohim always. He saw in a vision, evidently about the 9th hour of the day, a Malach of Elohim coming into him and saying to him, Cornelius. And when he looked on him, he was afraid and said, what is it, master? And he said to him, your prayers and your alms have come up for a memorial before Elohim. And now send men to Joppa and call for Shamma'un, or Simon, whose surname is Kafar. This is Peter we're talking about here. Here we have more Roman propaganda. A Roman centurion was devout in worshiping Yah, which is not impossible, but to claim that he had a vision of a Malik of Yah and that he heard the voice of Elohim talk to him directly, that seems a little far-fetched, but let's keep things in historical context. We remember that the historical messianic issue going on in Joppa at the time when the Abrim and Greeks were quarreling occurred much later, and this is probably just pure Acts fantasy. Remember, this happened in the 50s. This wasn't in the 40s. Kafar then has his infamous vision of the unclean animals that descended 3 times, which was representative of the 3 Gentiles he was to meet. This is so ridiculous that many have gone so far as to make Cornelius a Yashraali or Israelite, because the doctrine just doesn't fit any other way, really. The problem with that is you have to literally ignore the text and history to maintain that doctrine. And the obvious purpose of this passage was the acceptance of Gentiles, specifically Roman centurions who were killing our children. Continuing chapter 10 of Acts, verse 24. And the day after they entered into Caesarea, and Cornelius waited for them, and he called together his family and near friends. And as Kafar was coming in, Cornelius met him and fell down at his feet and worshipped him. But Kafar took him up, saying, Stand up, I myself also am a man. And as he talked with him, he went in and found many that were come together. And he, meaning Kafar, said to them, You know that it is unlawful thing for a man that is a Yehudi to keep company or come to one of another nation. But Elohim has shown me that I should not call any man common or unclean. So right there, the text is basically telling Kafar, don't make no distinction between clean and unclean. That is a huge conflict with the culture of Yashraal, but the point is, Cornelius bowed down to Kafar in reverence, and Kafar informs him and his Gentile family and friends that it is not lawful for him to deal with them, which is doctrinal truth, and Kafar practices everywhere, as we will show. People will see those verses, read them, and still try to justify this doctrine and claim that Cornelius was actually from the northern kingdom, and that's why he bowed down to Kafar, who was from the southern kingdom, because northern kingdom Yashraali or Israelites bowed down to the southern Yehudi who were kings or whatever. That too is totally false for 3 basic reasons. Number 1, Cornelius was a Roman centurion from Italy. In order for him to be Yashraal or the northern kingdom, then he would have had to have been one that lived in Rome. The problem with that is during this time in history, Yashraal were banned from Rome and by extension, Italy. This is evidence in the book of Acts itself. Sephar Ma'asim, chapter 18, verse 2. And found a certain Yehudi named Aquila, born in Pontus, lately come from Italy with his wife Priscilla, because that Claudius has commanded that all Yehudi depart from Rome, and came to them. This was probably more of Acts historical lies with this Aquila and Priscilla or whatever. But the element of truth is that this banishment was an actual historical event that was well recorded by at least 2 witnesses who were Roman historians. We have Suetonius, who lived from 69 to 122 CE, records in his work, Divius Claudius 25. Since the Yehudi constantly made disturbances at the instigation of Mashiach, or Christus as he has recorded, he, meaning the Emperor Claudius, expelled them from Rome. You also have Cassius Dio, who lived from 150 to 235 CE, records in his work of the same name regarding an early action in the reign of Emperor Claudius. As for the Yehudi, who had again increased so greatly that by reason of their multitude, it would have been hard without raising a tumult to bar them from the city of Rome. He, meaning Claudius, did not drive them out, but ordered them, while continuing their traditional mode of life, not to hold meetings. Claudius started his rule in 41 CE, the same year that Agrippa I came over to Palestine with Silas and Paul. This expulsion was sometime near the start of his reign, thus making it historically impossible that Cornelius was a Yehudi from Italy, unless he was in Caesarea due to the exile from Rome, which that in itself isn't impossible, but we will prove that he was definitely not a Yashra'al just the same. The second point that makes that whole doctrine totally false is that Kafar was from the northern kingdom himself and from the line of Una or Jonah by two witnesses, who are both supposed to be quoting HaMashiach on two separate occasions. One is from Besorah Mattatyahu, 16:17, and Yahusha answered and said to him, Blessed are you, Shama'un bar Una, Simon son of Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed it to you, but my Father which is in heaven. Next, Besorah Yachanan, the non-synoptic gospel. So when they had dined, Yahusha said to Shama'un Kafar, Shama'un bar Una, Simon son of Jonas, you love me more than these? He said to them, Yes, master, you know that I love you. He said to him, Feed my lambs. If you do minimal research, you will find that Una or Jonah was from the northern kingdom and lived in Nineveh. Therefore, the notion that Cornelius was a northern kingdom Yashra'ali bowing down to a southern kingdom Yehudi cannot be true according to the text that you claim to believe in. The third point, and the most important in our humble opinion, is that there is no law in Torah stating that the southern kingdom cannot keep company or go to the people of the northern kingdom. There was definitely a split, and the northern kingdom was exiled, but scripture clearly says that the southern kingdom was far worse than the northern kingdom by two witnesses. One is Yirmiyahu or Jeremiah 3:11, and Yahweh said to me, the backsliding Yashra'al, meaning the northern kingdom, has justified itself more than treacherous Yahudah, meaning the southern kingdom of Judah. Next is Yachazikal, who is a Nabi before him, chapter 23, verse 11. And when her, meaning the northern kingdom of Israel, sister Ahulibah, meaning the southern kingdom of Judah, saw this, she was more corrupt in her and her inordinate love than she, and in her whoredoms more than her sister in her whoredoms. And that she, meaning the southern kingdom of Judah, increased her whoredoms. For when she saw men portrayed upon the wall, the images of the Chaldeans portrayed with vermilion. Okay, the southern kingdom of Yehuda or Judah was far worse than the northern kingdom of Yashra'al Israel. That is just a scriptural fact. And any notion that the southern kingdom had to stay away from them because they were evil is pure false doctrine, not grounded in any text at all. So we have this Cornelius, who is a centurion and a Gentile, but is supposedly a righteous man, and he doesn't believe in HaMashiach. The text does say that Kafar instructed them all in HaMashiach after they met, but Cornelius is listed as a good man in Acts because he follows Elohim and prays while giving alms to the poor. However, he didn't go up to Shavuot or Pentecost, so he couldn't have been following the commands of Elohim. Kafar went to Pentecost, and did the others kept the festival as well. Even the Greeks were at Pesach when Yaakov Sadiq died, keeping the festival too. And even Paul's recorded as keeping them. So this guy just wasn't following Torah. While it is true, the text does say that he did give alms to the poor and prayed, the text also says, Elohim says if you don't follow Torah, your prayer is an abomination to him by two witnesses. One from the OT, one from the NT. In case anyone thinks that this is one of those things that change with HaMashiach. Primary sources is Mishlei or Proverbs 28:9. He that turns his ear away from hearing Torah, even his prayer should be an abomination. Next up is Besorah Yachanan, or the Gospel of John, the non-synoptic gospel. Now we know that Elohim does not hear sinners, but if any man be a worshiper of Elohim and does his will, him he hears. We understand that sin is transgression of the Torah or the law. Therefore, if this guy Cornelius was truly a worshiper of Yahweh, then he had to keep Torah. Because as we have already shown, Yahweh has the same Torah for foreigners as he does for native Yashra'al. He did not keep Pentecost, which is in Torah. So his prayers weren't heard by Yah according to the text. And we cannot even say that he thought he was under a new covenant for Gentiles, that he did not have to keep those things, because he didn't even learn of HaMashiach until Kafar taught him. So that whole notion is off the table. And guess what? We also have a historical Cornelius. Of course. Josephus is thorough if nothing else, and is the truth about this guy recorded just like the others. The accounts and acts are all just sand today, and we can use real historical documents like antiquities to get some type of solid granite under our feet. And in chapter 20, book 20, chapter 1, a sedition of the Philadelphians against Yahuda, and also concerning the vestments of the high priest. Upon the death of Agrippa, this is Agrippa 1, which we have related in the foregoing book, but Fadus, as soon as he was come to procurator in Yahuda, found quarrelsome doings between the Yehudi that dwelt in Pereira, that's that Arabian-controlled, Nabatean-controlled area where the Ebionites ran to, and the people of Philadelphia about their borders at a village called Mia, that was filled with men of a warlike temper. For the Yehudi of Pereira had taken up arms without the consent of their principal men, and had destroyed many of the Philadelphians. Fadus was procurator of Yehuda for 2 years, from 44 CE to 46 CE, appointed by the Roman Emperor Tiberius Claudius Caesar, who was born 10 BCE and ruled from 41 CE until he died in 54 CE when he was replaced by Nero. Claudius came into power and helped his friend Agrippa I to assume rule in Palestine in 41 CE, the same time as we have already shown many times. Fadus took over as procurator of Roman Judea after the death of Agrippa I in 44 CE, not long before Thaddeus was beheaded by Herod of Chalcis. We also see that region of Pereira again, that Ebionite-friendly region that took the family of Hamashiach after the murder of Yaakov Sadiq in 62. They stayed in conflict with the Herodians like Antipas, Agrippa I, and Paul. In order to reduce the zealotry, Fadus decided that he would keep the robes of the high priest in the Roman Fort Antonius, which made the leadership fear the people would rebel. The Herodian establishment did what they always do. They asked Rome for help, and specifically Caesar. Antiquities, Book 20, Chapter 1, reads, that they, meaning the Herodians in Palestine, might, in the first place, have leave to send ambassadors to Caesar to petition him that they may have the Kadush vestments under their own power, and that in the next place they would tarry till they knew what answer Claudius would give to that their request. The Herodians went to Rome for help because they wanted those garments back that they were granted by Herod I in the first place, mainly because the high priest garments symbolized their rule over the faith system and over the masses, but also because they knew it would cause Yashraal, who were already rejecting the Herodians as foreigners, to rebel even faster. But when upon their coming to Rome, Agrippa Jr., that's Agrippa II, the son of the deceased, understood the reason why they came. For he dwelt with Claudius Caesar. He lived with him, as we said before. He besought Caesar to grant the Yehudi, meaning the Idumeans or Edomites, that doesn't mean the true Yashraali, their request about the Kadush or set-apart vestments, and to send a message to Fadus accordingly. And of course, Claudius helps out his boy, We read, hereupon Claudius called for the ambassadors and told them that he granted their request, and bade them to return their thanks to Agrippa for this favor, which had been bestowed upon them upon his entreaty. Claudius tells the rest of the Herodians that he will give them what they ask, but they better thank Agrippa too, because it was because of him that they were getting help. Then Claudius writes a letter to Fadus, just as Agrippa II asks. It reads, now I have written about these affairs to Cuspius Fadus, my procurator or governor. The names of those that brought me your letter are Cornelius, the son of Ciro. In 44 CE is where we meet the historical Cornelius, who was indeed a Roman, but he was a courier that took a letter from Agrippa II in Rome to Emperor Claudius, and not a centurion. Could it be that there was another centurion named Cornelius? Certainly. However, he is not recorded anywhere, and Josephus has everyone else recorded. So it would be strange if he did not know of a popular centurion in Caesarea that had all the Yehudi respect for him. The themes are so similar between Josephus and Acts because this historical Cornelius was the one who bridged the Romans with the people of Palestine, just as Cornelius did with the Yehudi and the Romans of Caesarea. This Cornelius was created for the fiction of Acts solely to legitimize Paul later in the narrative. This concludes part 2C on the truth about Stephen's martyrdom, and we will break here and pick up in part 2C3 that will conclude the video with Paul's last 2 trips to Palestine. Please feel free to provide any feedback or ask questions in the comment section. Shalom.